Hello everyone, thank you for coming back to the second video here on my channel. Last time I talked about the top 10 most anticipated films for 2019. And I'm going to continue doing top 10 videos because typically at the end of the year for my blog, I would post, like the top 10 best films of the year, top 10 worst films of the year, and then anticipated. But this year I wanted to do something a little bit different. This time I'm also going to add a new category, top 10 disappointments and top 10 surprises. Now what I mean by this is that these films weren't necessarily amazing or necessarily bad either in the case of disappointments. These are interesting cases where either I was really excited for a movie and it didn't meet up to my expectations, or a movie necessarily wasn't on my radar but then ended up being one of my favorites or just something I really enjoyed. Even if these movies don't end up on my top 10 worst or top 10 best list for this year, they're going to represent ones that definitely defied my expectations. And so for this, I'm going to go ahead and get the negatives out of the way by talking about the disappointments first. The first one I'm going to mention here is Klansman, directed by Spike Lee. And this one I definitely liked, and that's the reason why it's number 10. I enjoyed the experience of watching this movie. It was funny, it was poignant, it had great performances from the whole entire cast, especially John David Washington, who was Denzel Washington's son. But for me, I really didn't feel as if the political agenda of the movie always was consistent within itself and was necessarily healthy for our political environment now. Others will disagree. Other times the movie felt as if it dragged on for too much longer than it should have been. There was material that could have been cut out from the film to condense the runtime and to make the pacing feel better. But otherwise it is a good movie, and so I'd still recommend that you watch it. Next, we have Bohemian Rhapsody, which is kind of ironic because that just won the Golden Globe for Best Drama Film for this year, and Rami Malek also won the Golden Globe for Best Actor, which I do think he deserved. He gave a great performance, but I didn't really feel as if that movie portrayed enough to really have a single focus. It had the problem that a lot of biopics do where they can condense so much information and so much time into a 2-hour runtime. Literally the whole entire 15 years in which it led from the creation of Queen to their performance at Live Aid, that there was just so much going on to really focus on for me, and it was very messy, historically inaccurate, and it was a very generic biopic too. For a band that was very unconventional and did a lot of insane things at the time, the movie just didn't really justify being a movie all about Queen and the legacy of Freddie Mercury, in my opinion. Next we have Ready Player One, which was the latest film from Steven Spielberg. And he is personally one of my favorite directors. I'll watch anything that he ever makes. But this one, I don't think his is best. And I think a lot of that has to do with the screenplay here, because I didn't feel as if the characters were dynamic enough for me to really be invested in and to appreciate their journey. And a lot of instances in which it honestly just didn't really impact me emotionally. But otherwise, Ready Player One is still enjoyable to watch, both as a video game fan like I am, and then as a movie fan because there are a lot of dazzling visuals. So if you like that, you'll probably enjoy this movie, but for me, it didn't have a lasting impact. At number 7, we have Mid-90s, which was the directorial debut of Jonah Hill, that guy. And a lot of people really praise this movie for getting us into the mindset of kids in obviously the mid-90s who were into skater culture. Despite how good the child actors were, especially in scenes together, there was too much going on in the story in terms of reprehensible behavior and bad shenanigans going on that I didn't really feel invested in anything. I didn't feel as if I could empathize with them or sympathize with some of the things that happened to them in the story. And while that is purposeful in some ways, I didn't really find much moral value in that, and that's why I didn't feel emotionally connected to the story. At number 6, we have Leave No Trace, which has been another quiet, independent film that has been on a lot of people's radar throughout this year, especially in a top 10 list for the end of the year. But to be honest, it just wasn't my cup of tea. I'm okay with movies that are more meditative, quiet, and don't really implement much music, that are just focused on people being in their environments and living through them. But I just didn't, for me, the directorial style of Deborah Granick, who also made Winter's Bone, just didn't work for me personally. It's more of the movie just not being for me versus being wrong within and of itself. At number 5, we have Pacific Rim Uprising. For me, this was crushing. because I'm a pretty big fan of the original movie. I mean, it's not that great, to be honest, but it knows what it is. Guillermo del Toro, he did a great job directing that movie and giving it a great sense of fun. But this movie is honestly the Independence Day resurgence of the Pacific Rim franchise. You know, it just feels bloated, really dumb character choices, and a movie that really just doesn't feel fun in comparison to what the original offered. And number 4, we have Batman Ninja, which a lot of you probably have never heard of, and I'm kind of glad that that would be the case because this is a really bad movie. It attracted my attention because it was a Japanese animated Batman film that basically took all the characters we love and put them into a Japanese feudal setting. But none of the perks that you might think would be found in that situation are actually present in the final narrative. It's just confusing, it's insane in all the wrong ways, and it just wasn't fun, especially because the action was too stylized and animated in such a way that it just looks more ugly than it does beautiful. For the next one, we have Thoroughbreds, which is kind of similar to mid-90s for me. This was another film that was really appreciated by critics when it came out earlier last year. But for me, it was another situation where, despite the fact that it was intentional for us to see reprehensible behavior and kind of see the irony and the sarcasm in all of it, I wasn't invested in any of the satire because it didn't resonate with me. It just felt dark in all the wrong ways. Its plot was stretched too thin to the point to where I didn't feel invested in everything that was really going on. And that was disappointing to me because I was really excited to watch it, given that all I had heard out of festivals. But for me, it just didn't work, to be honest. My second to last pick for this list is going to be Mary and the Witch's Flower, which is an anime film from a studio called Studio Panak, which is kind of like the successor studio to Studio Ghibli. It might just be because that I have such a love for that studio's movies, Studio Ghibli's I mean, that I was disappointed by Studio Panak's debut because although this movie has incredible animation in it, I was disappointed by how much the director seemed to try to copy off what Hayao Miyazaki did with so many of his movies. And honestly, the story, while it had some entertaining moments, and it was very pretty to look at times, like the visuals and everything, the characters and the plot just didn't really seem to go anywhere fulfilling. And that's a depressing thing because these filmmakers have often had strong female characters at their center. But this one, Mary in particular, was very flat. She barely has any progression from A to B at all. And the same goes for the plot too. Pretty mediocre for a debut, and I hope that their future work tends to be better than this one. Alright, now for number 1 on the disappointed list. This was a movie that I was very excited for, and even though it's not necessarily bad, it's this high because it was so high on my anticipation list that given that I just didn't really have that much of an emotional investment to it was kind of heartbreaking to me. And that was Ralph Breaks the Internet. Wreck-It Ralph was one of my favorite films, animated films anyway, that Disney has made in the past decade or so. And because of that, I was really excited that Disney actually gave the filmmakers an opportunity to make a sequel to it. There was a lot of opportunity there for them to expound on the story, make it more involving for their characters, and perhaps even expand their love for video games and with all the references. But in making Ralph Breaks the Internet, I feel as if the filmmakers lost touch with what made the first film great. A lot of that had to do with the central characters, the world building. Yes, the references, but the references were there because they were trying to establish the world itself. It blended into the world building, and everything that went into how this film was constructed, how this plot progresses, and how the humor is structured as well. It was more fleeting in its entertainment value and its emotional impact than the first film was. And that's why I personally felt disappointed, because the first film just meant so much to me personally. And after watching this new one, I I felt indifferent. Maybe that'll change upon a second viewing, but for now, it's my number 1 most disappointed film of the year, because I just don't feel like it reached to me on an emotional level. But that being said, there is no need to continue harping on negative things, because now it's time to talk about the top 10 surprises of the year. The first one I'm going to mention is Tomb Raider, which I know a lot of people have said honestly isn't that great, and I would have to agree with that. But in comparison to a lot of other video game movies that have been produced, especially earlier on in the 90s and early 2000s, This one's actually very competent in terms of its filmmaking and its acting and storytelling. Even though it's just a decent film, I think the fact that it actually is enjoyable and is consistently entertaining from beginning to end was enough to leave me satisfied. Number 9, we have The Ritual, which was kind of an underseen horror film that debuted on Netflix here in America. And for me, it was almost like a blend between the Blair Witch Project and The World's End. That seems like a very odd mixture, and it is, but watching it, it was a great experience because it's very dark and atmospheric and leaves you wrapped up in a mystery as it goes from beginning to end. And it's also an interesting film because it places you with a group of British male characters that you can really enjoy and be invested in their emotional journey with. At number 8, we have Bumblebee. And I mentioned this film because when I first heard about it, I wasn't excited. Pretty much every single Transformers film except for the first one has been one that has really left me wanting more. But this one was actually good. Like Travis Knight, the director of Kubo and the Two Strings, brought on, and I think his insight was very beneficial. But it also has a really good storyline. The characters are great, especially Haley Steinfeld. And it's an actual fun time, not diluted by any horrible jokes or just terrible characters and plot lines. At number 7 is Love, Simon. This was really interesting because I didn't really know much about the story going into it. But after having watched the film, I was very pleased with how well it was able to tell the story about a gay teenager trying to overcome his issue of trying to figure out how he's going to come out to his friends and figure out how to connect with this other boy that he likes. It feels strange to say this because of my religious background and everything, but I appreciated what the film did in presenting a story that is all about trying to empathize with people no matter what their opinions or their backgrounds are. And I think that's very important for our day and age. So as both an entertainment and as a statement, I think it works really well. Up next, we have Overlord, which was originally going to be the 4th film in the Cloverfield franchise, and that was eventually dropped by J.J. Abrams and crew. And I honestly really enjoyed this movie. Like, its plot can be simply summarized down to Nazi zombies, like Call of Duty Nazi zombies, but it does that really well, balancing incredible action, awesome visual effects, solid performances, and a genuine sense of entertainment value from beginning to end, to where it was able to blend together the war, World War II specifically, and horror genres together into something that feels wholly unique and enjoyable. At number 5, we have yet another Netflix original movie, which was To All the Boys I Loved Before. This one's interesting because, I have nothing against romantic comedies. Like, if they're good, they're good. But typically the ones that I've seen haven't been. They've just been full of cliches and don't really tell a cohesive enough storyline. But this one's different, even though it's still hampered by cliches and dialogue that isn't necessarily the greatest, but with competent cinematography, great performances, especially from the lead, and then a storyline that actually lets you be invested in what's going on. I was pleased with how this movie turned out. And if you have a spare 90 minutes at the end of the night, feel free to watch it on Netflix because you might actually enjoy it too. Number 4 is one of the most successful experiments in cinema that I've ever seen, which is Searching. Looking at the poster originally, I honestly didn't expect much because it looked kind of like your standard cliched horror poster. But then I heard that this film was getting a lot of buzz out of festivals, that it actually was a pretty decent film. And then when I watched it, I was blown away by how well the filmmakers are able to take a concept of watching computer footage and turn it into a very fun, very intense, and surprisingly emotional thriller about a teenage girl who goes missing and the father who ends up going on a search to find her. I don't really want to give anything else away because of the narrative, which has many interesting twists and surprises, but please do see it if you can, because it is seriously one of the more surprising movies of this year, both in terms of how well its filmmaking works and just for how good of a story it is. Number 3 is Upgrade, another film that if you'd heard about its premise and heard about the production design behind it, you might think it's just another generic cliche attempt at making something original for sci-fi. But this is one that actually worked. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the character work is pretty decent despite having kind of a generic a revenge plot. Another huge reason why this movie works so well is because of the direction and the cinematography mixed in with some gorgeous visual effects. Which is pretty interesting to say because this movie was made for less than $10 million, but it has the style, the skill, and the efficiency of something that was made for like $150 million. It's incredibly entertaining. Like if you can stomach some of the violence that is portrayed here, then you're gonna find a really fun ride to get wrapped into. With number 2, as we get close to the top, I'm here to present to you the best broad comedy of 2018, which would be Game Night. Yet again, another example of a film that I expected nothing from. Like I thought it was just gonna be generic Hollywood garbage, but it ended up being one of the most satisfying theater-going experiences I've had all year. I laughed from beginning to end. It's a subversive thriller, while also maintaining itself to be a really fun and entertaining comedy, and features some of the best performances out of the year, especially from Rachel McAdams and Jesse Plemons. If you haven't heard about this movie, I'm legitimately sad for you, because it is truly hilarious from beginning to end in ways that you don't expect, especially with how intricate its cinematography and direction is. And then it's one of those movies to where you watch it and then you tell everyone else to watch it and they're like, no, that movie looks like garbage. But then when they watch it with you, you get the personal satisfaction of knowing that you proved them wrong with how great it was. At number 1 is the superhero film that's taking the world by storm right now, and that would be SpiderMan Into the SpiderVerse. This movie came from the same studio that made one of the worst animated films of all time in the Emoji Movie. That movie just barely came out last year, and yet they do a complete turnaround and make something truly amazing with this unique, stylish, and absolutely incredible adaptation of the Spider-Man comics in ways that we've never seen before. Miles Morales is an amazing hero, and it's also great because we have a lot of great other characters to get involved too, with 5 other Spider people that are featured here. And it's also surprising that Sony Animation was able to mix together storytelling and animation so well here in ways that is able to rival even Pixar and Disney animation. And it actually makes me excited to see what the future holds for their studio, and I couldn't be happier with how this movie turned out. Thank you for watching this particular set of 2 different top 10s laced into one. I know the video might end up being a bit longer because of that, but I wanted to try something new, and I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on all these movies. Next up, I'm hopefully going to get my top 10 worst films of the year up pretty soon, and when that comes out, I hope you enjoy it. And then if you like this review, please like and subscribe, and then follow me on Facebook as well. And thanks again for watching. Have a good day.